what is K-pop to you? Because in the academic literature, people argue all the time about what is K-pop and how you define it and things like that. So just for you, I guess, as a starting point, what is K-pop?
Personal information, but I was born in 1997, so I wasn't there to experience the 90s K-pop that people refer to as old school K-pop, you know?
Mm.
So all I know is, faint memories of K-pop from the 2000s. So to me, K-pop, musically speaking, I believe developed its distinct sound and melody structure around, I would say, late 2000s. I would say 2007 to 2009. That is when I think musically K-pop starts sounding different from J-pop. And I can say this because I was also a rabid fan of J-pop as well. Musically speaking, it's the bubbly teen pop tune that a lot of people would think of when they hear the word K-pop. Linguistically speaking, its lyrics being in Korean would qualify it as K-pop to a lot of people. But that's recently changing and the spectrum is getting broader because more idol groups who are totally Korean or have other Asian national members releasing songs that are completely in English in terms of lyrics. So that's blurring the category more. Speaking of broad categories, now I think just qualifying for one of the following should make it K-pop is one, lyrics are in Korean, but the performer is based in Korea. They appear on music shows on Korean television channels. So someone random, let's say in the United States, just singing a song in Korean, say the person's ethnicity is not Korean and releasing it and is not based in Korea, I wouldn't say that's K-pop. Second category would be if the artist is of Korean nationality or descent, or the group is with a majority member of Korean nationality or descent. And it can also obviously involve non-Korean members, right?
Yeah.
The category is going all over the place, but for me, the bottom line is the artist who released the music has to be primarily based in Korea.
Makes a lot of sense. So even if they're not Korean, they might be like Lisa or the members from different groups that are from different Asian countries. Just before we go into that, Haley, you mentioned that there was K-pop finding its own sound, distinguishing itself from J-pop, during the 2000s. What was it doing musically then? Like how could you explain that process when it started finding its own maybe characteristics? What was happening then in your view?
Well, I'll have to, briefly start with basically the very first history of K-pop as we know it. The very beginning was the Korean performers hired to perform on American military bases. And they were heavily influenced by what the American GIs wanted performed at their clubs and whatnot, American jazz, especially towards the 90s. Black music and Black culture started influencing K-pop a lot, almost to the cultural appropriation level, I would call it when I look back on videos from that era. If you listen to K-pop from the 90s, like God or like old school rappers like Yoonmire, it pretty much sounds like just, MC Hammer.
Yeah.
And then after the 2000s mark, I would say it heavily benchmarked J-pop idol tunes specifically. The melody structure was a bit trotty, if you know what I mean. It kind of had this, Japanese feel of a melody that you wouldn't hear from, American pop song structure. And after, I would say, the 2007, 2008, 2009 mark, which a lot of the big old school K-pop groups who are still active debuted, they started releasing songs that are different in terms of melody and structure from J-pop, as far as I believe. Certain notes that you use when you compose a song that gives that certain trot / J-pop vibe. Those got fainter after the 2007 mark, I believe, especially with the emergence of Big Bang, the boy band.
Yeah.
After that, really, I think even from the instrumentals, no one would really confuse J-pop from K-pop if they're remotely interested in the field.
It's a really interesting development. I completely agree about early K-pop sounding like elements of, let's say, American music. Like Sotaji sounds so much like Cypress Hill at times. And when it starts making its own thing, when you talk about Big Bang coming in, what I kind of associate with K-pop, and I'd love to get your take on this, is kind of a schizophrenic approach to structure. And I don't use that word negatively, but sometimes in Western music, you can understand where the song's going to go. The bridge and the chorus, they're all kind of predictable. But sometimes what K-pop does best for me is it's kind of weird in its structure, and it does these unpredictable things. I mean, aespa's doing that to a huge degree at the moment. It's like 10 songs in one. But what's your take on that sort of structure element of it, Haley?
I could do a whole separate podcast on aespa, but
yeah,
to go back to the new K-pop sound that I think started in 2007. I'm silently laughing because I think the word schizophrenic is just perfect. I went to elementary school in the UK. So when I came back to Korea, I started listening to what my friends were listening to and what was popular among them. And the songs were just like randomly out towards, like in the middle of the song, someone who's probably not qualified to rap just starts rapping for about 10 seconds and it's just gone. And then it's just like a whole new, then there's like a keychain and there's like a ballad segment in the middle of a dance track. And I was like, what is going on? I think that is also the part of the sound change, because actually to this day, I believe J-pop idol tracks, they have a structure. They also have random, elements of rap sometimes. What I noticed from J-pop is the idol songs all follow a very formulaic structure. And then K-pop is they have like a rap member and they just come in for 15 seconds and then they leave the track. Especially the sound of K-pop starts a new phase after the 2012 mark, when a lot of these big entertainment firms started hiring, interestingly enough, composers from Northern Europe, like Sweden, who write these deep club trap tracks. I don't know if you remember, when FX released Electric Shock in 2012, I remember reading a Korean article about how unconventional it was, because it was impossible to sing along to it at a karaoke, which was a big element in a K-pop song success. People singing along to it in karaoke. No one's gonna be able to sing Electric Shock well in karaoke because the beat is just like deep club, these sizzling beats that just stop in the middle, stuff like that. So in a way, borrowing your words, I would say K-pop has been getting increasingly schizophrenic over the years. That's one way to put it.
I think that's a good thing as well, though. I mean, because it makes it sound unique and it's giving us something that we don't have elsewhere. You mentioned very briefly, like FX. Yeah, I can hear that club sound in what they do. You mentioned briefly like Big Bang and their influence. I mean, sometimes when we think about Big Bang, it's the surrounding scandals now that we think of, but
like turned into a crime ring. But
yeah, I know, and that shouldn't be taken lightly. I don't mean to make light of it, but at the time, with like G-Dragon and the music and the aesthetic that he was doing and everything, it seemed really kind of radical and very impressive. It was hugely influential. What was your take on the arrival and emergence of Big Bang on the industry and sort of G-Dragon and the other members as well?
I mentioned Big Bang when I mentioned the 2007 transition of the sound of K-pop. Even if they turn into a crime ring and they're just like rampant criminals, most of them anyway, I think there's no doubt that Big Bang just completely changed things for K-pop in terms of music and aesthetic, mannerism, everything, really. Like what a K-pop star looks like and acts like.
There's always this idea that if something's contemporary, it must be new. But what I saw, the Big Bang members doing with their aesthetics, with their visuals, with the way they would dress and present themselves, we saw it later with sort of Taemin and more androgyny coming in and sort of gender bending and playing with sexuality and aesthetics. But I saw elements of that in Big Bang, and I thought it was very interesting, but they sometimes get left out of that conversation for those reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think they really get left out of the conversation because no one really wants to talk about them anymore for the social controversy they've been causing. Speaking of gender bending, they were the original gender benders, really, with the men wearing a lot of accessories and, really putting effort into style and wearing these neon pastel colors, which was, I'm pretty sure even Koreans called that gay, no offense to, the derogatory connotation of the word. I'm pretty sure even Koreans back then who were not used to the K-pop style as we know it today thought it was just abnormal. And then if you think about the original female gender benders, they were 2NE1. And when they debuted, they were literally called the female Big Bang. Coming from the same agency, but also, in terms of style. So yeah, OG gender benders, Big Bang and 2NE1.
That's a very good line, Haley.
Yeah.
So where is K-pop now? So you've given a brief little sort of overview of where it started, the break from J-pop, the arrival of groups, the influence of Northern European writers, and that. Where is K-pop now, do you think?
I think in terms of popularity, especially global popularity, it is at a peak, and I think we're going to see a higher peak in the future, definitely. But how strong will that Korean sense of identity going to be in the future? That is a big question I have, and I really want to find out in the future. A lot of people say, oh, K-pop is still a niche in the West, right? Actually, K-pop is a niche in Korea. And I think a really good metaphor is when we think about 10 years ago, Justin Bieber, before he hit puberty, and One Direction, were everyone in America and the UK, listening to their music and thinking positively of them? Not really, right?
Right.
A set group of really dedicated fans were listening to them. And just like that, K-pop, short for Korean pop, it's still really listened to by a dedicated, primarily young fan base, even in Korea. Ironically, I think we're seeing it today at this very moment, so it's not even ironic, but the fan base of Korean pop will get much bigger abroad, while the ethnic Korean fan pool will stay steady in terms of numbers.
This is really interesting to me because when I teach Hallyu at university courses and things, many of the international students, they're huge fans of the groups, they're card-carrying members of various things, but the Korean students are all listening to Selena Gomez and Charlie Puth and, international. So there's this crossover happening that I find really fascinating, that people are attracted to the other one.
I know a lot of Koreans who just don't listen to any songs in other languages, just in general. There's also, obviously, pop stars are still largely popular in Korea. There's also Koreans who don't listen to the K-pop idols, but listen to bands, like Angmu, like the borderline K-pop, or other bands like Hannabi, considered less idolish, right? Yep. And I have been thinking about why international fans tend to be more loyal as fans. And I think it's actually the same reason that Big Bang is getting condoned more by foreign fans, because they tend to stay loyal more so compared to Korean fans. I think the exotic factor is something that we can't ignore. Sometimes it's kind of it's the elephant in the room, because it's it's associated with fetishization, which to a degree it is true, but we tend to be more fascinated, infatuated with stuff that seems exotic and different to us. I can like, let's say, Korean pottery, traditional pottery from the Joseon dynasty. I like it. I think it's beautiful, but because I grew up with it and it's so normal to me, I'm not infatuated by it. But then I see a lot of Japanese people just absolutely infatuated by Korean pottery, and I've met them in person, and they can't stop talking about Korean pottery, right? So I think infatuation really happens with something that feels foreign, different to us, not something local.
I completely agree with that. And sometimes we define ourselves. I grew up always trying to look for music that no one else was listening to. There's also that kind of hipster element. We want to be cool, we want to define ourselves with these things. It's very natural. When you talked about the loyalty of the fans, and of course all fans are different, right? So when we talk about K-pop fans, every fan will be a fan for different reasons, and that's obviously clear. But when you talk about the loyalty, why do you think they're more loyal? I mean, is that because they're not as aware of what's happening in Korea, or why do you think that is, Haley?
I think what you just said is a big factor. They're not really quite aware of the gravity of the situation, either because they don't have access to original news in Korean, or they just don't perceive it as that big of an issue culturally sometimes, when it's not a legal issue necessarily. For instance, as we speak, there's an actor named Kim Sun-ho who has been in a really popular TV series. Yep. And he has been, quote unquote, canceled in Korea because he admitted to forcing an ex-girlfriend to have an abortion. Now, I had to write short articles about him, and I went into his Instagram page, and it's just completely full of English and other Southeast Asian languages supporting the guy, while the very few Korean comments in between are expressing disappointment. And I thought it was just one of the examples of the foreign fans being more loyal. This might cross some people the wrong way, but I think a big part is fetishization. Like this just overzealous idealization of a foreign man / foreign woman, right? It's not evil. We tend to think of, especially members of the opposite sex, as more exotic and more attractive, right? In many cultures, right? It might get weird, but I think a lot of those fans who condone, let's say just a convicted rapist or someone who literally pressured his girlfriend to have an abortion and just run away after giving 2 million won, right. that person's trash. You shouldn't condone that person. But people saying that you did nothing wrong, we're going to protect you until the end, stay strong. I think the only explanation is that you became infatuated with this celebrity that's easy enough already to get infatuated with. But this time there's the exotic factor. And you also don't have the news in the original language, and you also don't get the cultural gravity of what he or she did wrong, often a he. And that just creates the dumpster fire.
Let me ask you, if I can, about this kind of fetishization that goes on. I just want to touch on it a little bit, because I would say, well, I want to hear your opinion on it. Is that part of the K-pop package, though, that sort of entertainment companies and idols, K-pop artists, they sell this kind of relationship to the fans in the way that they talk, in their actions, by remaining single, in the public eye? How do you view that as part of sort of a K-pop package that they give to fans, and they encourage that kind of relationship?
Yeah, I wrote a recent article about this. Bobby of boy band Icon announced that his girlfriend is pregnant, and everyone was shocked. And it turns out the baby is due next month, as people read into the handwritten letter. A lot of people were shocked or disappointed, which I don't really understand what's going behind the fans' minds when they're heavily disappointed by someone else about to give birth or start a family. And it all boils down to a pararomantic feeling that the fans have, right? And what I wrote at the time, also quoting a lot of the other experts, is that it's easier to just dismiss those fans as, they're crazy, they think they're dating the celebrity or something like that. But I think a lot of the stars who do face controversy when they start personal, actual romantic relationships, they're not completely innocent. Of course, they shouldn't, face hate comments or like death threats for living their life. But they're also partially responsible for selling the pararomantic fantasy. And to be completely honest, if they actually had, pure musical talent that can't be replaced, they can't be replaced by just another pretty face or a pretty boy face, fans won't care if they date or get married. And I thought of an example is that I'm a fan of The Weeknd, and The Weeknd, he's a stud, but he's not exactly known to be a pretty boy, right? And that's not the reason behind his popularity, right? Have you ever seen anyone get dressed that he was dating someone?
Yeah, but that's the thing, and that's why I'm curious about it, because you mentioned Bobby, right. And there was Chen from EXO, and that all kicked off last year, and we kind of I grew up thinking it was really natural for pop stars, because they're at the peak of their physical attractiveness sometimes, or they're insanely talented, and we see them going through all these relationships in the West. But in Korea, it's completely different, and I'm curious about where it comes from, why it's still maintained. Will it change in the future? Will it be something that, the entertainment companies slowly have to sort of say, well, it's a bit... I'm just curious, like, where it comes from and whether it will last in the K-pop industry.
As you mentioned, Chen and Bobby, to be brutally honest, just boils down to the fact that they don't offer anything that's irreplaceable. So if they just disappoint their fans' pararomantic fantasies, they can just find the next pretty boy face or the next somewhat talented singer, right? They are not exactly best known for their irreplaceable music qualities or their vocals. Even in Korea, if an artist gained success primarily because of, raw talent, no one cares if they're dating, really.
Yeah.
The pararomantic standard applies to a certain type of artist that I just explained. And I think it is changing. as I mentioned in the article, now a lot of the fans are not saying that, oh, how can my oppa date someone else, because that will be delusional. A lot of the times now they're coming up with seemingly more rational reasons to be angry, like, oh, he's causing damage to the team activity. He will be unable to release albums, which damages the team, his career, his fans who rooted for his career, which I think is just an excuse to be rationally angry without coming off as just like a heartbroken fan. So the change, I would say, is that fans are now a bit too ashamed to completely admit that they are mad because of the romantic feelings. And hopefully in the future, fans really completely realize that this is not a good way to be a fan. If you're only a fan of someone just because you like to think you're in a relationship with them, seriously reconsider your fanhood. I hope that's the way that fan culture would evolve in Korea, and also for like a lot of the fans abroad too.
It's a really interesting point that I think you're making, that once artists get really successful, they're able to grow beyond that, and they're able to sort of live their lives and do what they want, and because they would be irreplaceable, or they're they're so valuable that they're allowed to do that. We sort of say the fans need to perhaps reconsider their fanhood. Would you also say that like it's sometimes almost a bit not their fault as well, because this is what's pushed at them, isn't it, as well?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It's kind of like, I do feel a bit not sorry for them, that's the wrong word, but it's like, well, they have been given this by other people. It's not like they've gone out and pursued it, but it's part of the package that they're given.
I can say, like, objectively speaking, it is delusional, but considering that they're mainly young fans, I can't completely blame them, because that is the product that they were sold, right?
Right.
Yesterday I wrote about SM Entertainment's fan service app. So on this app, if you pay a fee, like a monthly subscription, you get personal messages from the artist, right? The artist is in fact sending a group message, but you just get it on a one-on-one chat room. Do you understand the system?
Yeah.
So you feel like you're having a one-on-one chat with this person, and the chats are like, oh, today's cold, wear warm clothes, and have you eaten? What is this if it's not deliberate selling of pararomantic fantasies on the entertainment firm's part? So I think, both sides are in the wrong of this mess that happens when popular celebrities caught dating, sadly.
I'm kind of glad that I'm not 14 and 15 with a smartphone, that I missed, because there, but for the grace of God, could go me. I could have grown up and I would be in a chat room at 14 years old with Esper or Blackpink or something like that. It's just how they grow up. That's the society, perhaps.
Right. As Will Smith said, you could be stupid and thirsty in private before.
Very well said,
lucky.
Will Smith. Yeah. It's amazing. I grew up listening to Will Smith as well. He used to be really big. You've mentioned some of your writing, and one of the reasons I did want to talk to you, because you do a lot of great writing on this topic, and I've read your articles, and I think I think you do great stuff, Haley. When I read a lot of other stuff, or when I go through social media, a lot of the big media outlets, whether it's in English or Korean, a lot of the reports will just say, oh, this week, this group, they broke 100 million views, or 50 million views, or 1 billion views. And I always find this kind of, I don't know, just like sporadic advertising. Like, it's never actually talking about music or artists, but that, the industry is just devolving into this number game of how many views you can get. What's your take on that? These reports we get about the number of views dominating a lot of the conversation.
Or this could be a whole separate talk, but the number of albums sold, because that's also a common topic, right?
Yeah.
As someone who is in charge of writing those articles on a designated day, because those are short articles that we just kind of tend to take care of, the real honest reason for any media company, those are the ones that get easy clicks from the super loyal fandom. And I also, do you censor parts of this?
I can or I can't. It's just, if there's something you want me to.
I wanted to say that this K-pop industry, especially between the fandoms, it's kind of become a numbers pissing contest.
Yeah.
Right. Just, we broke, 100 million views on YouTube in 55 hours and 16 seconds. And the certain fandom is just overjoyed, and the other people are like, who's that? Of course, those articles are not the top-notch journalism people dedicate their time to write. It's what generates traffic, and it's what keeps the news outlets going. And it's also, if I had to name a useful factor of those articles, is that it helps me actually personally kind of keep track of the artist's career. I actually found one artist meaningful. It's actually N hyphen. I hope I'm pronouncing them right. I've only written about them. Their first week sales for their most recent album was almost 3 times the first week sales for their previous album, which really indicates like a big growth as an artist's career, right? And I think that's actually worthy of monitoring as someone who is in charge of writing K-pop in my publication. So I think as an indicator of their career growth, I think it's meaningful. But if we consider, bulk buying and their numbers are staying kind of, the same, we just can guess that it's a result of, consistent bulk buying. But if it grew by 3 times, I would say it's worth noticing.
Yeah, there's the bulk buying of physical albums, and there's the environmental aspect of that as well, and how that plays out.
Right.
What about when I started really seriously looking into K-pop and YouTube and views and how it all went down and social media, I started seeing like the guidelines on how to stream. And so you described it sort of like as a pissing contest between groups, like who can get the most views in the least amount of time. And when I started seeing all these streaming guidelines and videos of people using 8 different devices to have these things going like 24 hours a day,
all night when they're sleeping,
I was kind of like, wow. It was like I was seeing something. And I also then start thinking about the fan labor involved, that you have these multi-million-dollar companies, but all the work's being done by the fans like this. Do you have any take on this about the sort of passion and the way these things are streamed and the communities and the guidelines that engage in it?
Actually, Korea's, I believe, biggest music chart, Melon Chart, recently, a couple months ago, changed their standards for keeping tally because of that 24-hour streaming issue. I don't know the specific technicalities, but they changed the system that those mass streaming extort the charts a bit less. They changed the names to, I think, 24 hit chart, so it kind of reflects the actual numbers more accurately. So I think Melon Chart did a great job to change the system, because if you think about fan loyalty and how many traffic they can get, they could have just maintained the system. Who cares about those teenagers' mental health? But they changed system and their criteria because they knew this was a problem. It was almost like a K-pop sweatshop of fan labor. And when I actually write those short articles about, let's say, Stray Kids hit how many million views on YouTube, there's a lot of retweets that that our official Twitter account gets about these fan accounts saying, the fandom name, let's say ARMY or like this fan club name, go share this article, retweet it, give it a like, to promote that our group hit 100 million views. I mean, it's voluntary, obviously, so I don't have a problem with that, but I'm just astonished by the level of loyalty and the length they're willing to go, because I haven't been that motivated for anything in a long time. So that motivated.
I think you should start doing it for the weekend, I think, Haley. But you're right to say that,
he's fine without me.
Yeah, he is. But it is passion and it's loyalty. And, maybe that's a really good way of looking at it, that they're, very much devoted. And I'm sure there would be so many different artists or groups out there that would love to have, a devoted fan base like that, sort of looking out for them and backing them up. Maybe it's a positive thing if we frame it like that.
They're the people who create the market, right? The ones who are behind all the sales profits that Korea generated last year and this year. When I try to get into the shoes of the fans, when I'm writing an article about these achievements or controversy, it's like divination, trying to like, do you know that term?
Yeah.
It's been a while since I used it. It's like trying to go back to, thinking about what the founding fathers were thinking when they wrote the US Constitution. And my way of divination is, when I was in middle school, I actually used to collect albums by EXO. I even bought the Mandarin version. So I have to kind of revert back to my middle school self and think, what was I thinking when I bought the albums in Mandarin that I don't even understand because I don't speak Mandarin, with the money that I didn't have, right?
Yeah.
And I bought the mini albums, I bought the regular albums, bought the repackaged album. Now that's an infamous sales tactic in the Korean K-pop CD industry. And looking back, I really thought as a fan, I had to own them, like as a true fan. That was what made me a true fan.
Yeah.
And I guess with, more smartphones and technology, the list expanded, like the added duties of a true fan is to stream 24 hours on top of buying the album.
Fandom is performative now. It's not enough just to be a fan, but you have to perform the fandom by retweeting and sharing and streaming and things like that. There's a duty involved in it. When did you stop? Or I don't know, maybe you still do buy all the EXO sort of repackaged things, but was there a transition point for you, Hayley? Like, how did that work?
The members left before I did. Like a sad story I tell. I actually stopped at their overdose phase because I noticed some members were escaping, for lack of a better term. Buying the album became an indicator of true, performative fanhood. It was in 2008 when TVXQ released their absolutely legendary album, Neurotic. I think every Korean, around my age or older knows that song. So their 2008 album, Neurotic, to promote that album, they appeared on a comedy show called Gag Concert, which recently ended, but it was like a 2-decade-old legendary comedy show in Korea. And back in the day when it was a lot more popular, it was basically like a ritual for an actor or a singer to appear when they had a new release coming to promote it. And TVXQ was on it too to promote that album. One of the skits they had this, sharp-tongued guy just dissing everyone who was a guest, and that was his thing. So no one was offended, even if he said something like really dissing the celebrity. At that time, TVXQ's official fan club's name was Cassiopeia. They had 800,000 members.
Wow.
Like official fan club that you have to pay a fee. That's impressive, right?
Yeah.
And the comedian whose shtick was just dissing everyone said, if you have 800,000 official fan club members, why did your album Neurotic only sell 500,000 albums? Probably because 300,000 of them were kids below 14 who didn't have enough pocket money.
Wow.
But that statement is actually considered the turning point that he basically dissed and shamed that the fans who didn't buy the albums weren't your true fans in their face, right?
It's more dissing the fans than the band, isn't it?
He said it for fun, but I think a lot of people just don't remember that skit enough to, realize how much he changed the perception of fans on album purchases. He really said it for fun. He probably didn't even know that this was going to cause Korea's album sales to get this big.
It's the first time I've heard that as well. That's a really interesting story. And so it changes, somebody makes a lighthearted comment. It's on the Gag Concert, but it has an effect possibly, and it makes fans reassess what they're doing.
Right.
We've spoken a little bit about sort of the relationship aspect and the fandom of it, the success. You've also I think you've touched on it in your work, in your writing as well, the mental health aspect of it. Suicide is such a huge problem in South Korea, broadly across societies, not just in specific industries, but the rates are off the chart, and it's a number one cause of death amongst young people. It's such a tragic thing to write and research about sometimes.
It is.
Mental health. Yeah, it is. And I wish there was more sort of focus on it. There's still a lot of euphemisms used in the press, like extreme choice. But even doing media spots, I've had sort of Korean people phone in to the radios and the TVs and say, I think that in Korea, we shouldn't talk about it because people will look down on you if you talk about mental health. And, I was surprised by their reactions to that. And it seems to be becoming more and more prevalent in K-pop, the idea of stars. What's your take on that? Why is it coming out there? Why are people talking about it? Is it being successful?
There's been this long discussion in Korean society that in terms of death numbers, COVID is a joke compared to the suicide epidemic. And you worded it perfectly, the word extreme choice. Well, first of all, it is not a goddamn choice. We never say someone was suffering from cancer and chose to die, right? It is not a choice. It is a result of an illness. And I think the media glosses over it with a lot of euphemisms. And just like any other social issue, I think when celebrities are involved, it usually starts the social dialogue. Actually, the most recent article I wrote on K-pop was Sunmi recently speaking out about her mental health. In that article, I quoted a pop culture critic who mentioned the 2019 suicide of singer Sully as the crucial turning point of the mental health dialogue, at least in the entertainment business. Not really for the general public yet, because they're still ashamed their job and their the people around them still stigmatize them. But at least for showbiz, I think her suicide and then Kuhara and then a year shortly before with a bit less awareness, JoongAng of SHINee.
Yeah.
All those happening within about a year, I believe. Just it's more visible when celebrities commit suicide and it's on the news. When someone around you, just normal people, commit suicide, it doesn't make it on the news and it's not visible. Therefore, it does not start a dialogue. 3 really famous people taking their own lives in a year span. I think that really shocked people. It really made it tangible to the Korean public how serious of an issue this is, especially when a lot of the Koreans think, oh, mental health is a problem that will be solved if you just have enough money, if I get a job, if I get that promotion. And these celebrities who seemed like they had it all in these fancy houses with the perfect career, and they killed themselves. And I think that's what really was the turning point for the Korean public to realize that it's not all in your head. It's actually a serious it's a sickness. It's a mental illness.
Yeah, and perhaps the answer is not just nolyok or effort, which is sometimes, used in Korean society, right? But it's more that, if you have physical pain, you go to a doctor, and if you have mental issues, then you go and get it checked, and it's not something that should be ashamed of.
Right.
I've been rather impressed to see certain K-pop artists or people, actually coming out and addressing these things and saying they're taking a break or that they're dealing with things. I think Lee Soo-hyun's been doing it as well recently. So I think that it's a really good sign, because they're saying things that aren't really being said by other people, politicians. Yeah, and so I guess what I want to ask you here is, maybe should is the wrong word, but it's about values and K-pop stars. Now, we often kind of assume that K-pop is often valueless. You've got to keep your political opinions quiet, or your morality or your values, and
right, completely neutral,
because you don't want to upset fans. You might have fans in Japan or China, and we've seen all the stories, right, and the apologies that comes with nationalism, but
you can't even say women and men are equal anymore, apparently.
You can't
if you're a celebrity.
You can't say Taiwan's you can't say Taiwan's a country either, apparently, if you're with JYP.
You can't even wave the Taiwanese flag. It is insane.
Yeah. But I just wonder, with the position that they have and the effect that they could have on discussions like mental health, should we be asking them, or should we be sort of pointing them to do a little bit more, or it's not their role?
What I was actually shocked about last year in response to that is that, the question is, do they have this social responsibility, like, corporate social responsibility, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
What shocked me was last year, BTS, I think, spoke and funded really openly about Black Lives Matter, which is obviously a very important cause.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that they sponsored that first, and they still haven't, no Korean celebrity really has officially, promoted mental health awareness. I think they're only allowed to speak on issues that seem so detached and foreign from Korean issues or surrounding countries. It's wrong to say that there's no Black people in Korea, but statistically speaking, the number is very small, too small to affect any kind of debate in Korea politically, right? Or in surrounding countries in Asia, like China or Japan. So in retrospect, I think it kind of means that the only issues that Korean celebrities are allowed to talk about is something so detached. In other words, it doesn't really affect anything in Korea, to be honest. And it would be great if they speak on more issues like domestic violence, child abuse, mental health that is actually affecting the everyday lives of Koreans in Korea. But at the same time, I can't force them to do anything. I mean, they are famous, but that's the result of their talent and hard work. And maybe they didn't want to be famous. Maybe they just wanted to make music and money. So I can't condemn them for not speaking out on those issues, but right. I can say for sure it would be great if they do, and it would be really effective.
I think that's a really good position to take. Yeah, we can't force them to do. And I completely agree that the positions that they do sometimes take are generally external, outside of Korea, and in English, perhaps, rather than in Korean related to domestic Korean issues, because then it becomes politicized, right? Whether it's, right. Whether it would be abortion or women's rights or mental health or anti-discrimination, LGBT in Korea, that's where K-pop is still very neutral, isn't it, for the most part? And that's on them. That's their choice. Their hard work and effort has got them where they are. And so, yeah, if that's their choice, I guess that's what it is.
I guess it's the firm's choice, to be very honest. I'm sure the individuals as human beings, they must have opinions. It's just that they're not really allowed to.
Yeah, and that becomes part when you're in an entertainment company, I guess, and then you're bound by certain rules and regulations, right? Yeah, but still, I just want to keep that little bit of positivity that I have seen that discussion on mental health in K-pop, and I think that's a really good thing. Where else do you see good things in K-pop, Haley? So we've touched on a few sort of elements that might seem critical, or we're doing that, but where else do you see goodness and positivity and great things in the industry or in the music?
First thing that comes to mind actually goes hand in hand with misunderstandings about K-pop. I think as K-pop gains popularity abroad, there's also a better awareness that comes with it, as well as the haters. What came to mind was that there was this prejudice or stereotype that all these K-pop artists are manufactured and created, as opposed to independent, free-spirited Western artists. And actually, Dr. Phil mentioned this openly on a show. It wasn't his intent. Like, the main point of the show was not to bash on BTS. In a segment, he actually mentioned that these aren't real people; these are manufactured images. But actually, everyone in showbiz has a manufactured image. That's what celebrity and showbiz is about, isn't it? That was what I thought. So to pinpoint K-pop artists as these passive, personality-less, manufactured beings, I think honestly it is, basically rooted in racism. That is the biggest explanation that can explain the situation. And as K-pop grows in popularity, especially BTS topping a lot of the charts in the West, I think they're helping solve this misunderstanding, because it's well known that they produce a lot of their own songs. They release remixes, lyrics, and songwriting. And also, a recent incident was a collaboration with Megan Thee Stallion and BTS on their song Butter recently. And I don't know how much you followed the story, but actually Megan Thee Stallion's agency was against this collaboration because they thought it wouldn't help her career. So Megan wanted to do it, and her agency was holding her back.
I would fire that agency. That agency knows nothing.
Right. I mean,
a collab with
Megan
BTS
can do whatever she wants. Megan, you can't stop Megan Thee Stallion, right? And at the same time, it turned out actually HYBE, BTS's Korean management firm, was the one who was the most respectful and protective of their artists. So it completely was against the stereotype that the Western agency is the one letting the artists be completely free and creative, and these Asian K-pop agencies are the ones controlling, manufacturing these fake, personality-less non-artists, right? That was like a switcheroo. So I think as, BTS, the fact that BTS has a lot of agency over their music career and their activities gets known as their songs become popular, naturally they come hand in hand. I think it breaks these stereotypes that these K-pop artists are basically what I just said, non-human individuals, personality-less, just created images, which is rooted in racism, in my opinion.
I think there are definitely people inside the K-pop industry that are doing exactly what you say. They're breaking these images, they're breaking the stereotypes through what they're doing. I mean, and that's a really good thing. You've mentioned BTS a couple of times, and their achievements, their collaborations with different artists, topping the billboards and all the things that they've done. Is there something that comes after BTS? Because, when you're in the moment, it always feels like this is the pinnacle, this is the alpha and omega, this is everything. And I'm just wondering, like, is there something that comes after? I mean, they're going to have to contend with military service and all these other things that go on, right? What comes after that? Is there another step? What's the next step from that, Haley?
If I had the answer to that, the stock market would hire me instantly.
Yeah.
Actually, BTS is so big of a phenomenon. The Korean stock market is just so obsessed about their future endeavors, right? What happens if they go to the military, and especially high stock prices are, skyrocketing, but the only, no offense to Tomorrow by Together, but the only like internationally phenomenal act they have is BTS. So it's like $1 million question. If I knew that, I would be on Wall Street. Actually, the reason that I want to continue covering this specific field of K-pop is actually I personally want to know what happens after BTS.
Right. Yeah, me too.
Even if BTS, this mega powerhouse goes to the military, I don't think the other fans of the relatively smaller fans are going to completely disappear one day. So I was thinking maybe it's going to turn into a more dissipated grassroots type of fan activity culture.
I really get where you're coming from on when you're saying that you want to see where it goes. And me too, because the support and the interest in K-pop is genuine. Like with all the international students, they're not lying when they love this thing. All around the world, people are digging into it. And I don't know where the story goes, and I don't know how it ends or where it ends or what comes next. So I'm with you. I'm really interested to see how it plays out as a cultural movement. And it's more than a cultural movement to people that are living it. It's real life, and it's also the success of their country and the pride and everything like that. So there's so many things tied up into it. Are there any things in like the next generation? You mentioned a bit of sort of M-hyphen. We've sort of touched on aespa. They seem to be doing all right recently. They're trying this. I like their songs actually.
It's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. The Savage one, and the next level was a bit of a remix from the old song, but I think they're doing some interesting stuff. They're toying with the metaverse idea, aren't they, and these sort of computer alter egos. What's your take on that?
Right. I mean, I think it's definitely meaningful that they're doing something that is really original. I'm still skeptical about how much of a role that plays in their popularity, because as far as I've heard from people around me and online, I think they can still be popular or even more popular without those AIs. Really, there's like complaints that these AIs like never change clothes because it actually costs too much for the graphic team. And the members dance better, so the avatars dancing next to them is just a really bad comparison.
They look terrible, don't they? They look like
honestly,
a PlayStation game from
I think aespa will be just as successful, if not more so, without the avatars. I don't know about the metaverse concept, because it is a very unique thing that sucks you into the storyline, although it could act as an entry barrier.
Yeah, it could, and it opens up possibilities. But I'm with you on those computer graphics. I mean, I saw them in the latest one, and it looks like sort of old PlayStation graphics from about 20 years ago. It looks really clunky, and I was surprised by how bad it looked in relation to the music and their dancing and their outfits. Everything else was tight.
Right, at least change clothes, for the love of God. I mean, everyone's wearing pure white and they're in purple and like this hobo look. What?
At least they're doing something. At least there's changing. And we mentioned sort of about BTS. They went through quite a few different changes before they hit on the successful model, right? It takes a while for groups, I guess, to hit their stride and find out what works. Yeah,
I think Savage is extremely consistent with Black Mamba, which relatively compared to like Next Level and Savage, Black Mamba wasn't really met with a lot of positive reviews.
Right.
But their concept hasn't changed. They stuck to it, and they stuck to the storyline. And I think they've actually been doing their own thing until it got noticed, rather than changing it.
Yeah, that persistence and consistency might be key. It's sometimes more than the music, and it's more than the successes, but it's what it gives to the people, that it's promoting awareness of the country and the culture. And
right.
I try to empathize with that as much as I can. Like I speak to I'm a bit older, I speak to older people, and they're like, I don't like BTS's music, but I'm really happy for them and it makes me proud. And there's that sense, like, I mean, because if Dua Lipa is like crushing the charts, or Ed Sheeran or Coldplay, I don't feel a sense of like UK pride in that, right? So, but in Korea, it seems a little bit different, and I think that's something that should be like, at least acknowledged, and I try to support that. Do you get that? Do you get that sense that it's this a sense of pride in the success?
Yeah, it's like a success of a group project. And what you mentioned is, I think the US and the UK, especially those two countries, they're really used to dominating the world, quite literally sometimes.
Yeah.
Actually, I think when non-US or non-UK singer performs really well on Billboard, I swear I did see some examples of that country being really happy. This doesn't have anything to do with showbiz, but remember when Slovenia like made a statue of Melania Trump?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like that. Like when you're not used to your country receiving any kind of spotlight, anyone from your country gets remotely famous, and it's like, yes, success, national hero, Melania Trump, but let's make a statue anyway. I wrote in my notes about Hallyu, and I think that is the term that really summarizes everything that you said about K-pop being more than the music. It's the language, it's the aesthetic, it's somehow also the social atmosphere and social values of Korea, whether it's good or bad. Right? It's like a total experience. I think really the best metaphor to compare it to is what Paris used to or still stands for. Right? It's more about just French food, fashion, language, chanson, or the city, the architecture. Those aren't popular just for the individual aspect, right? It's the total experience that Paris has and also symbolizes, in theory.
Yeah.
So I think K-pop is kind of like that. It's like it's more than the sum of its parts, to put it short.